Are you ready to become a change maker? Our 48-week postgraduate program in public policy or the PGP may be just the thing for you. This hybrid program is designed to give you both the theoretical foundation and hands-on experience needed to excel in policy making. With a mix of expert-led webinars, in-person workshops, and policy simulation exercises, you'll gain real-world skills along with personalized mentorship. Through our policy programs, we connect good people to good ideas and good networks. Apply now at the link in the description to make an impact.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy, a daily podcast brought to you by the Takshashila Institution. I'm your host for today, Wini Gurung, Communications Manager at the Institute. The rise of populist governments worldwide has led to the investigation of the linkages between populism and foreign policy. To discuss this in detail, I have with me Rishabh Yadav, PhD scholar at Academy of International Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, who will discuss his paper, Do Populists Make Populist Foreign Policy? Pakistan's Foreign Policy under Imran Khan. His paper studies the linkages between populism and foreign policy, where civil supremacy is lacking. Hi, Rishabh.
Hi, Winnie. Excited to be here.
So to get the ball rolling, your paper argues that while populism is a global trend, its impact on foreign policy varies across countries. So how does populism impact foreign policy, and how does the case of Imran Khan compare to other populist leaders like Trump or Modi in terms of foreign policy and anti-globalist rhetoric?
So before coming to that, let me first define populism. So populism is not a codified doctrine, but a set of claims that features anti-elitism and anti-pluralism. What this essentially means is that, as Jen Muller argues, populists have a moralistic imagination of politics. It sets a morally, purely, fully unified and ultimately fictional people against elites who are deemed corrupt or in some other ways more morally inferior. So there is this fictive separation of people into two antagonistic and homogeneous blocks, which is pure, authentic or true people versus the corrupt elite. And the second feature of populism is that they are also anti-pluralists. This means that they claim an exclusive representation of the polity, and this is a moral claim, not an empirical one, and based on the definition of the people. They often portray their political competitors as the part of the immoral, corrupt elite, and when in power, they refuse to recognize any opposition as legitimate. So based on these two logics, populists claim that the politics should be an expression of the general will of the people, and they and only they can represent the general will of the people. Logically, this also points out that the populism is an exclusionary form of identity politics that poses a danger to the democracy by producing a fantasy of single, homogeneous and authentic people. Of course, with the rise of populism worldwide, scholars have now also begun studying the effects of populism and foreign policy. So what are the features of populist foreign policy? Since, as we know, that populists employ a moral reference to justify their rule, this also impacts how they view the world and conduct their foreign policy. The notion of people-centrism entails a notion of sovereignty, which means that populists are less willing to dilute the state sovereignty, and this could result in them contributing less towards global public goods, making concessions on global governance issues, or cooperating with international institutions. We have seen this in Trump backing out of the Paris Agreement and his alliance commitments, and also in the cases of Brexit and Eurosceptics parties in Europe. Second, the division between people and elite antagonism also translates towards transnational elites, accusing them of depriving people of their sovereignty. And this fuses the domestic corrupt with the threatening other transnational elite. And by linking these domestic and transnational elites, populists try to link domestic politics with foreign policy. And therefore, the populists are more prone to politicize the foreign policy issues to gain benefits in domestic politics. Apart from that, populist leaders are more likely to be personalistic, sovereignist, reactive, discontent with the liberal international order. They prefer bilateralism over multilateralism. And in terms of style, they are bold, brash, and unconventional. capturing both admiration and sometimes and controversy. We all have seen the visual representation of it when Trump met Zelensky. And in terms of how populist leaders are different in their approach, I would say that one of the differences is due to the intensity and degree of populist discourse and their ability to generate those discourses. The more a populist leader stays in power, the more it is his ability to bypass the conventional methods of diplomacy towards pursuing a populist foreign policy by centralizing, personalizing, and politicizing it.
So, populist leaders they often frame foreign policy within a people versus elite dynamic. So, how does this rhetoric impact diplomatic relations, both bilaterally and multilaterally?
The people versus elite framing remains central to the populist discourse. On one hand, they use foreign visit for the purpose of populist grandstanding by showing the personal rapport with the world leaders to convey the image to the domestic public that they are strong, popular, and hyperactive. So, second, the notion of people also increases when populist leader add diaspora into the definition of the people. For example, one could see Modi addressing large crowds during his foreign visits, right? Which this not only improves diaspora ties, but it also creates an unmediated link between the leadership and the people, and also serves the populist purpose to show that they are true and the only representative of the people. However, on the other hand, such framing also results in deinstitutionalization of foreign policy bureaucracy, reflecting the populist desire for personal representation. Second, it also challenges the traditional understanding that the states may have developed over the years of diplomacy and negotiations. It creates a certain kind of a void in the meaning of that relationship. For example, currently the Europeans would be thinking after the Trump elections, Europeans would be thinking about guarantees of US security.
So, your paper discusses empirical heterogeneity in populist foreign policy. How do domestic institutions, state capacity, and military civil ties shape the outcomes of populist decisions? And also, how does Pakistan compare to other populist led countries?
No, thank you, Wini. This is an important question. So, as we have already discussed the elements of populist foreign policy, but we have in our scholarship we have also seen that not all populist leaders represent them equally. They tend to differ in intensity and degrees. Therefore, the scholarship on populist foreign policy has shown empirical heterogeneity. For example, Trump disregards multilateralism and prefers bilateralism and transactionalism foreign policy. On the other hand, populist leaders from global south do not disregard multilateralism. This is more to do with states' location within the international system, domestic institutions, and state capacity. Populist leaders who find that engaging with multilateral institutions will benefit them from status gain and also benefit them in domestic politics, they would prefer multilateralism, right? So even in Pakistan's case, where civilian supremacy is lacking, the convergences and divergences of interest between populist leadership and military establishment plays an important role whether we will see a populist foreign policy or not.
Now I want to shift the focus on Imran Khan. So he fulfills the necessary conditions of populism, which are essentially anti-elitism and anti-pluralism. So how does his political style, governance decisions, and rhetoric reflect these features?
So Imran Khan's political discourse reflects a construction of antagonistic and divisionary spaces on the moral claims between authentic people and corrupt elites, right? So if you see at Imran Khan's political vocabulary for mass mobilization, he fuses the country's economic and political problems to the corruption of the ruling elite and present himself as the messiah, the only leader who could help Pakistan grow and progress. And the political rivals are continuously demonized through unparliamentary languages by construct binary narrative between himself and other political leaders as honest versus corrupt, righteous leaders versus evil elites. He has presented himself as the only viable option for the country. The political opposition has was not seen as the opposition as we understand within the categories of political democracy, but Imran Khan usually referred to them as the political mafias of Pakistan. Further, the Naya Pakistan discourse reflected a political ideology embracing Islamic utopianism that promised to rebuild the lost, idealized, and fictionalized society of Medina. By doing so, he drew a political frontier of us and them. Both his anti elite and anti pluralist narrative presented a model for the ideal state of Pakistan where not only elite and corrupt are non existent, but such a state is also based on Islam. Further, Imran Khan has also utilized state institutions to undermine political opposition, has carried out witch hunts against them. Uh, his regime has curbed press freedom, gagged media houses, suppressed civil society. Therefore, with the claim of exclusive representation, Imran Khan's tenure was marked by suppression of media and civil society, and there was attempt to capture state machinery with the help of military leadership.
Uh, so your paper also examines three key case studies: Pakistan's engagement with the IMF, the attempted Pakistan-Turkey-Malaysia alliance, and the anti-French blasphemy protests. So, what do these cases say about the limitations of populist foreign policy when confronted with institutional and structural limitations?
Well, if we look at all these three cases, there was to a certain degree a populist political style in approaching towards them. Imran Khan's rhetoric was about championing the will of the people, building on highly sovereignistic stance of renting state sovereignty by going to the IMF, penchant for centralized and personalized decision making processes by accepting to be the part of Pakistan Turkey Malaysia alliance and by sidestepping the foreign policy bureaucracy and using the anti French protest to politicize the blasphemy issue at home. So, like in terms of processes, we see a purely populist approach, something that the research on populist foreign policy has shown. However, if I come to the other part on the outcomes of these policies, we see that Imran Khan did not succeed in translating his fiery rhetoric into actual policies. And therefore, we also witness the limits of populist foreign policy in delivering actual outcomes. In the case of Pakistan, I argue in my paper that this is due to states' weak capacity and civil-military relations, which is in favor of the latter, right? Military vetoed Imran Khan's stance on the alliance project, whereas in case of IMF and anti-French protests, the state neither had the capacity to survive without loans or nor to boycott French products or expel French ambassadors since France is an important defense partner.
So, in the case of the IMF bailout, Imran Khan was against the idea of approaching the institution, aligning with his populist rhetoric against external financial dependence, right? So, however, he ultimately reversed his stance. What does this tell us about the tensions between populist rhetoric and economic realities?
Well, at least from the IMF case, we can discern two things. First, we should seriously take the rhetoric of populist leaders. They are not just to gain the popular base or electoral victories, but the populist rhetoric also defines their worldview and in essence guides their policy making. Even when the deal was signed, the IMF report blamed Imran Khan's government for the delayed response in addressing the crisis that further plummeted the country economy. So if you did not have had a populist worldview at that time and could have agreed to IMF demand swiftly, the situation might have been little different. And second, since populism is not a coherent ideology, it does not provide any functional roadmaps for structural, economic, and political solutions, and leading populists to resort to bandit solutions such as austerity measures or loans from friendly countries in case of Pakistan. However, since these bandit solutions have limits and populist leaders do reach a dead end, especially in technical matters such as economy, they have to take a policy U-turns to adapt measures they criticized earlier to address the crisis, just as what happened with Imran Khan when he signed the IMF deal. So therefore, it is also a double sword for the populists, since on one hand they claim to represent the people, and on the other hand they are unable to provide welfare measures. The possibility of such U-turns, especially in the economic realm, occurs because they can always shift the blame to the previous regime for the crisis, and second, because they need to implement welfare policies to sustain their populist constituencies. However, the time gap in reversing these policies can seriously impact states' political and financial affairs, and we did see such thing happening in Pakistan's case.
I also want to focus on the country's military, where it plays a dominant role. So, how did this military civil dynamics enable or limit Imran Khan's foreign policy decisions?
So, as we know, that military has the upper hand in Pakistan, and it of course plays a dominant role in foreign policy, uh, whichever regime is in power, populist or non-populist. However, as we talked about earlier, that populist foreign policy characterizes the championing the will of the people and is often aggressive, personalistic, and centralized. And therefore, it is bound to collide with the military preferences. So, how does two work together? I argue in my paper that in such a polity where civil supremacy is lacking, uh, if civil establishment and military establishment have convergent interest, but there is a structural cost of following a particular policy, then the populist rhetoric will continue, but structural factors will dominate the policy actions. However, if there are no cost of pursuing the policy, civilian policy will prevail with populist rhetoric, with military support. However, if both populist leadership and military establishment have divergent interests and there are structural cost of pursuing a policy, then populist rhetoric will still prevail, but military will veto the policy actions, as we saw in the Turkey, Malaysia, Pakistan alliance, and also in the India-Pakistan ceasefire talks and India-Pakistan back channel talks, where military was willing to have these back channel talks and ceasefire. And finally, if there are divergent interests between military and populist leaders, but also there is no cost of pursuing that policy, then the civilian policy will prevail. This could We could well argue that this could be seen in India-Pakistan trade relations during Imran Khan, where he did not allow India-Pakistan trade to happen.
So, finally, how does your paper aim to fill existing gaps in the scholarly framework of populist foreign policy?
So by engaging with Pakistan, this article broadens the conceptual, empirical, and geographical reach of populism. This paper makes the following intervention to the scholarship of populist foreign policy. First, Imran Khan has been categorized as a populist leader. However, most of these scholarship works only look it through a narrow lens of his anti-elitism. This article puts Imran Khan under stricter conditions, looking at is he both anti-elitist and anti-pluralist, and then asks the question, is Imran Khan a populist? And we come to an answer, yes, he is definitely both anti-elitist and anti-pluralist. Second, with populism has a varied impact on foreign policy across regions. And this article locates the case of Pakistan under a populist leader, Imran Khan. And this article not only contributes to the emerging literature on populist foreign policy, but also widens the understanding by locating a global South state within the theoretical literature. Third, Pakistan is characterized by a hybrid regime where military plays an important role in political and foreign affairs. Therefore, this study contributes to the populist foreign policy literature by underlining the conditions under which populist leaders are uninhibited or are constrained when civilian supremacy is lacking.
Thank you very much, Rishabh, for a very insightful discussion. I am sure the listeners got a lot to learn from this. We hope to host you again very soon.
Thank you, Wini. I hope to be back here soon too.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.